Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McClernand, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, so today is actually a very special episode, not just because of my guest, who I'm very excited to chat to and explore his story, but because this is the 100th episode of Between the Before and After. That feels like a significant accomplishment in the podcasting space where, and Alex, you'll be able to share quite a few numbers, more so than I can, but not a lot of podcasts make it to 100 episodes. And so I wanted to bring Alex on to this episode to explore his story, but it's also a tip of the hat and maybe to what you do presently with PodPros and PodMatch and the impact it's had on my podcasting journey, and probably one of the big reasons why I've kept podcasting. And so as a tip of the hat of appreciation, I wanted to bring you on and share your story as well. So welcome to the show, Alex.
Coach John, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I mean, anytime I've been able to be like on a milestone episode, it's exciting. And I love the fact that you mentioned that what we've done with PodPros and PodMatch has helped, because like getting to 100 episodes is huge. A show that makes it to that is, I can't give you the exact number, but you have more than a 94% chance of not making it, I think, or something like that. And that's if you make it past a certain number of episodes. So it's like the chances of failing go again and again and again along the way. And you've just continuously added value and done so well with the show. So I mean, honored to be here and really proud of your accomplishment. So congrats to you, Coach John. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks. And I think one of the big motivating factors was one of those plaques. So I don't know if they're in production again yet, but one of the ways that you wanted to honor podcasters who made it to 100, 200, and 300 was presenting with plaques. And I love the fact that you're so committed to seeing podcasters continue. It's a passion of yours, and so that's one of the big reasons why I was like, man, I gotta get to the 100 episodes because I want that dang plaque I can hang on my wall.
We're having a material problem like the rest of the world, but we are reimagining it, and we're pretty close. So hopefully I can get a picture of you holding one soon. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It would have been awesome to be able to like have it and hold it up for the episode, but that's okay. Well, I will proudly display it once I can get one of those in my hands. So
it's funny. I always make the joke I should have just stayed in software, because anytime it's like a material issue, I'm like, what is that? And apparently the whole world is suffering from all kinds of things when the time I was recording this, right? So it's like, man, we've never had a material issue with software. Maybe I should have just stuck with that, right? But no, we are determined. We're going to get back to it and make it happen. But again, kudos to you. You've done such a good job with this.
Thanks, man. And before we dive into your story, because there's a lot more than podcasting in your story, and I'm excited to explore that. But I always like to get people just a quick snapshot of where you're at right now and what you're doing.
Yeah, so everything I do right now is PodPros, is the name of the organization, which is podpros.com. That's everything I do. So basically, I myself am an independent podcaster. We serve independent podcasters through different software companies that we've created and through education, all that stuff, right? And our goal is not to get people necessarily to go from 0 episodes to 1 episode. It's to go from 10 to 100, right? That's kind of like where like we fit in to help podcasters, because I believe that podcasting is really the ultimate form of content that's serving the world right now. And so for me, like, I am passionate to help indie podcasters get their voice out there, get the voice of their guests out there, and in turn, hopefully change and make the world a better place. And so everything we do is around those lines. And the products, real quick, PodMatch that you referenced, that's, for lack of a better term, it's like a dating app, but it connects for dates. It connects guests and hosts together for interviews. So if you're like a coach podcast guest and you're looking for a podcast to be on, it'll find podcast hosts that say, I'm looking for a guest that is a nutritional coach, right? And it's going to put you two together and match you, and vice versa. And we've got some other softwares as well that maybe we get into. They're not as fun or sexy, but all around helping those podcasters go from 10 episodes to 100.
Yeah, which I love that, because I mean, I've been a guest on over 160 podcasts myself.
Goodness, congrats. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I actually tried out 4 different podcast guest booking platforms, as you know. And so now I would say probably half of those guest appearances have been booked via PodMatch. And so it's been a great way to like connect with people really, really efficiently. You've done a brilliant job of making the whole process a lot more efficient. So I love that.
Thank you. That means a ton. And yeah, you did a great video on that. My team like digested that video multiple times, like learning from the way that you're using our system even. So again, thank you.
Yeah. But, if we rewind the clock a little bit here, or maybe a few years, because I'm guessing you're mid-30s. That's like funny. Like, I don't actually know how old you are.
I am 34 as we're recording this, born in 1988.
Okay, so you're still technically a child of the 80s, which isn't too
bad. Yeah. I barely made it, but I'm there.
Yeah. You were young enough to maybe have at least a couple of years of childhood without the internet. Would that be right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, which is actually where I still live. So born and raised and stayed. It's funny. Jacksonville is one of the biggest cities in the United States land-wise. So like it just kind of goes forever. You can drive over an hour and still be in the same city. So I've just consistently moved closer to the ocean. My goal one day is to end up living on it, but I'm getting closer to it. So,
but by on the ocean, are you meaning having a floating house?
Not quite. Sorry, I should say beachfront. Let's put it that way. A floating house does not sound interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, the ocean, it might be a little bit rough, but I thought that would be kind of an interesting thing to do for like a year. You go in one of those like floating houses and travel around the ocean. Like that'd be an adventure.
It would be. That would be very interesting for sure.
Yeah. But growing up, did you know much about podcasting?
No, I mean, the thing is, I actually came to podcasting pretty late because it technically started in 2004. I believe was the first year of podcasting. Yeah. I don't think I listened to a podcast till 2014, probably. I imagine I was 10 years past the start of it. And I actually remember the first person, like the first group of people ever even tell me about podcasting. And they were I was working in aerospace at the time, and they were just guys in the warehouse, and they were listening to something all together. I'm like, what are you all listening to? Is this a radio? Like a radio show? Like, no, it's a podcast. Like, it's Joe Rogan. I was like, who the heck is Joe Rogan? What's a podcast?
Right.
So anyway, that was my introduction to it about 10 years after podcasting had been created.
Yeah. So growing up, you didn't have this idea of like, oh, I want to create a software that's going to marry podcasts to, podcast guests and hosts. What did you picture yourself doing with your life?
Well, it's funny. The very first thing I wanted to do as a kid, like my first memory, like I think maybe my mom or dad asked me, but what I said I wanted to be was a cowboy because I really like Westerns. So I told them I'm going to move to Texas when I become an adult, and I'm probably going to be a sheriff, And my mom just destroyed my dream right there. And she goes, Alex, they have cars and electricity in Texas too. Because I was watching these Westerns as a little kid in my head. I'm like, oh, this is just Texas. Like, I got to get there. Turns out that wasn't the case. So that shattered my first ever dream, I'd say. Past that, I was actually an interesting kid. Like I knew at one point there was an experience I had that taught me that business would be what I go into, but it was still very general and vague. But that's just because even as a kid, I realized I wasn't good at very many things. And we can certainly dive into that if it makes sense. But I just knew it was me something in business. Let's put it that way.
So you say as a kid, you had this level of self-awareness that I wasn't good at many things.
Mm-hmm.
What taught you that, or what planted that seed of thought?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Coach John, your coaching is going to come out here. So if I start crying, everybody, Coach John just has it. And God blessed him with that gift. But anyway,
not the first time it's happened,
right? So for me, I will say I had a super supportive family, like always really supportive. But it was really just it was my own inner self-awareness. No one ever told me what I was good or bad at. I just it was intuitive as a child. And I remember being about 10 years old and realizing, man, some of my friends are really good at sports, and I played every day with them. But I couldn't catch the ball like they could. I couldn't throw it like they could. They were all a little bit faster than me, right? And I was a smaller kid. But there was that, and then at the same time, it's like, okay, well, if you're not good at sports, you're good at video games. But I would get crushed in every video game we play. And we were playing back then Nintendo 64, right? Like those type of things were the games we were playing.
Yeah.
In the same vein, I wasn't really the smartest kid in school. I struggled really bad in school, actually. That was like the toughest thing for me growing up. But also, I wasn't good at music. I had 3 younger brothers, and all 3 of them were musicians, and I couldn't clap on beats. So I'm realizing again, 10 years old, wait a minute, I'm not really good at any of this stuff. And it wasn't a way to beat myself up. I didn't struggle with any sort of complex or anything like that. But I just knew that I wasn't good at those things.
That's awesome. Awesome. It's really fascinating because the way that I would look at it now with my perspective is that you have a brain that sees the world differently.
Right.
And so sort of the traditional things that we try to steer you towards, like you should focus on this or focus on this. And it's like, well, you have an out of the box way of thinking and seeing the world, which is of course led you to where you are today. So, and you got 3 younger brothers, did you say?
Yep.
Any sisters, or are you the oldest in the clan?
I'm the oldest. There's 4 boys, my poor mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now I have a bunch of like sister-in-laws, if you will. And
Yeah.
but learning to it's funny, like even getting married, I did not know what I was getting into because it had only been me and my brothers like my whole life.
Right.
And so like
Yeah.
even getting married was culture shock. I was like, man, you all are different, like
That's a great way of putting it, So, so you kind of get through high school and you decide, okay, I'm going to go study business. It seems like that's what I should do.
Yeah, and if I could backtrack, like the reason
Yeah.
I realized, like going back to the age of 10 is actually when I discovered that business was something I was good at, and actually happened through starting to sell used golf balls.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
which is like a weird thing, I know, but like as a kid, I'll never forget it. One day I was out in the golf course because it was like across the street from our neighborhood,
Yeah.
and me and my friends would go out there because, and here's why: our parents would say, "Don't go on the golf course," so we'd all run straight to the golf course, right? Because
Of course. Yeah.
that's what rebellious young kids do. And so we play on the golf course, and one day there was a golf ball sitting out there, and usually they were like you could see them in the bushes. We never really grabbed them, but I picked up this one. I was like looking at it right as this golfer was riding by in his cart, and he goes, "Hey kid, what does that golf ball say on it?" I turned it around. I'm like, "Titleist Pro V1." And he goes, "I'll give you $3 for it." And I was like, "Huh." Light bulb moment, like first light bulb moment in my life, probably. And I told my friends after we walked away, I'm like, I wonder if the rest of these say Pro V1 on them as well. And if they do, well, can we get $3 for each of them? Because I can see about 6 of them right now. And so we just started collecting golf balls and selling them. So every Saturday morning we'd post up, and it was about 4 of us in the neighborhood. Some of my brothers were too young to be part of it.
Right.
So we just kind of grabbed some neighborhood kids, but we built this whole thing. Like in the evenings, we go find golf balls, and Friday we clean them up, and then we get them all organized, and we go out there and sell them. And for the first time ever, I found something that came very natural to me. The idea of designing a system of how the workflow would go, negotiating with adults as a 10-year-old kid, right? Like all these things. And I found my stride. And I'll be real. For the first time, I was like, wow, I'm good at this, and I like this. And here's the thing: when you're selling golf balls used like that, I mean, you can only get away with it while you're cute. So it lasts about 2 years. And at the age of 12, you're not cute anymore. I'm like, kid, give me that back. I hit it in the water last week, But
right.
But while it lasted, that is what taught me that business would be a right avenue for me. And so like now you're saying, like, fast forward through, I just kind of always knew that going into life as a teenager and into an early adult.
I'm so glad that you backtracked and shared that story. I absolutely love that. I was picturing you like going during the day and like someone would become looking for their ball and being like, "Where the heck is this dang ball that I hit?" And you're like, "Hey, I got this ball here for sale."
They're like, "Has my initials on it." No, we never took them out of live play. All right, that didn't happen. It was always the lakes after hours.
Right. Yeah. So, so then, did you have any other businesses in high school?
Yeah, actually, I had one other opportunity. So, again, mentioning that I wasn't good at school, I was actually homeschooled all the way through. I struggle with a learning disability, dyslexia, pretty bad. Like it took me a very long time to learn to read and to write. And interesting fact about me, like Apple Watches, you can like write in them and stuff like that, or you can use some like tablets. You can actually use like a thing to write in there. Because I had so much trouble writing, I had to learn to write letters in an incorrect way according to the English language. They look right, but I don't follow the same lines that people do. And still this day, I just obviously I developed at a young age, and I still do that. It's how I can still like read and write it. But those things, these devices can't pick up what I'm trying to do because they're like, there's no letter. Like from an AI perspective, it's like no one writes a letter like that. What is that? Those things have never worked for me. But anyway, because I had this struggle, I had more hours in the day. Let's put it that way. Like I was still doing school, but I understood like I could be done by noon. And so like I had the opportunity to have jobs. And so at the age of, I believe I was 16, it's going back a little bit now, right? But when I was 16, I started a company that was editing virtual tours of homes. Me and a group of people developed this weird concept of basically a 365-degree view of an interior of a home, which now is pretty common. If you go to a website like Zillow, you can kind of drag the mouse around, look at the roof and flip it around, right? But back then, I mean, we're talking, this was a long time ago. And so we were like the only people doing stuff like this. So at one point I had 3 editors working for me and 4 photographers. And we were just all day getting these tours and like stitching them together, building the way we build them and posting them to MLS along some realtors that we worked with. And I did that for a few years during high school. And it was like a really cool thing. Like I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. This is probably what, 04?
Yeah.
Yep. Man. Yeah, like I was like discovering, well, okay, I wasn't discovering email, but it feels like that was
right.
the level of like technology use I had at that point in time. Like, because Facebook wasn't really a thing. YouTube wasn't a thing, I don't think yet. Maybe Google was, but
Yeah, Google was even big. I can remember the first time someone showed me Google, and I remember even saying as a kid, I'm like, "That's a dumb name. It'll never last." Joke
Right.
on
Yeah.
me. Should have
Famous
invested
last
in
name.
that.
No kidding. Oh, that's funny. So yeah, you had this one creating virtual software. So yeah, you have this entrepreneurial lean here, which is amazing. I'm curious about dyslexia because I mean I think you're also quite self aware, and dyslexia isn't necessarily something that like goes away. It's that you're
Mhm.
like maybe alluded to without realizing it that your brain sees the world differently. Um, in terms of like learning to read and to write, like obviously you seem to be able to function pretty well in like the
Yeah.
modern world. What is your experience of it like today?
Yeah, this is a story that's, like, gonna weird some people out, but when I was in high school, uh, my mom, like, decided she was, like, gonna become a Christian and, like, got really heavy into that,
Okay.
and she told some people what I was struggling with, and those people said, "Oh, let me pray for him." And
Yeah.
somebody's like, "God's used me to heal people before, let me pray for him." This lady prayed for me and literally, like, it went away. I mean, I had developed my bad habits, and at this point, I was years behind, but I haven't
Right.
had any dyslexia issues since I was 16, probably around
Wow.
that time. Very thankful for it. Can't explain it, but like
Right. Yeah.
I've also devoted my life to that. So like I follow Jesus. That's the way I always
Yep.
just say it, and that's what I've devoted my entire life to. And not because of that. Like as a matter of fact, it was years later before I even like realized I'm like, holy cow, that's crazy. And like, but anyway,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah. So like for me, like I still hold the scars of that. So like I said, I write incorrectly if I'm
Yep.
like writing on a piece of paper, and thank God most of what I do is digital. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also like I love speaking in public and stuff, but if you hand me something to read, I'm going to start sweating and I'm probably going to fumble over my words. And that's something that's a scar I've held on to that
Yep.
I've worked very hard. Some speeches I've given, like in talks places, I've purposely had something written down that I was going to read that I didn't memorize so that I would kind of struggle through it with a group of people. And it's kind of painful to listen to, I think, but it
Yeah.
does stretch me. And eventually I believe I'll overcome that. But that's kind of like the long-term scar that's been with me from that, if you will.
Which is again really fascinating, and I love the fact that you've decided that, hey, this is something I struggle with. I want to face this head on, and see if I can make some growth here because like I love neuroplasticity and your brain's abilities to learn. I think it's super
Oh yeah.
fascinating. You're tapping like right into that. Um, so you're, when you head off to university or college you went to, we would just funny, we
Yeah.
just all
Yeah.
call it university up here in Canada. I'm
Yep.
Canadian, obviously, but
Right.
so you head off to college, and did you start studying business there then, like business administration or something?
Yeah, that was the idea. I was leaning toward accounting for some reason at that point. I look back now and like, what the heck was I thinking? You know, but like, I'm like, who wants to do that? And if there's anyone listening who loves that, God bless you. You are
Yeah,
needed.
love
But
accountants. I'm so glad that they exist. But yeah,
right. Anyway, yeah. So I did. I got started. Spoiler, I didn't finish. But I did get started as soon as I could.
yeah,
I think maybe I took a year off, or like one. I was probably one semester I took off or something like
yeah.
that. After high school, but at that point I had a job that was good. But yeah, I started, but I actually never finished university.
Right. Yeah. So you are. We can call you a college dropout.
We can, yes, we can.
But it's funny. Actually, I am too. People don't realize this, but
I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah. Except I got like right to the end of it and basically had a couple of what would they call them? Electives, and I just thought it was stupid that I had to like take these courses that had no relevance to what I wanted to study or do to fill out like something. And I was just young and rebellious, I guess
Yeah.
as well. So my act of rebellion was like to go to exam period. I don't know if I've ever told this story. Like the last exam period, and I went and like sat down to write like one of my final exams, and it was only worth maybe 25%. So I already knew I was going to pass the course. And they like wrote my name on the exam, handed it to the guy, and like walked out. And I was like, I felt like I was being like such a rebel or something like that.
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
and then for the other exams, I would like stay up all night playing video games, and then I would just go and drink a bunch of Jolt Cola and try and go in and write them without ever having studied, just to challenge myself. Like it was just, and then I went and joined the Navy. So,
Right.
yeah, it's like, whatever. Yeah. But it's interesting to think that it is possible to make a life, to make a living, to develop a skill set. Obviously, I've went on to study things since then, but to build and develop a skill set without necessarily a university piece of paper with your name on it. So when you made the decision to drop out and like leave college, what were you're just like, this isn't for me because, and I'm going to go do this instead.
Yeah. I mean, so first off, going back to like my high school
Yeah.
education being difficult for me, right? Like I worked
Yeah.
very hard And I gave it 100% of what I could, like always tried, and I got C's. I mean, that's just how it was for me. And like, what is it? C's get degrees is what we say here in the stateside, you know? So it's like, now you look back and it's fine. But then like, I was like, man, I'm working harder than all my friends and doing worse than them. And I get that I had like a little bit of disadvantage for a while. I was a little bit behind, and I'm thankful for my mom for being willing to homeschool, because I would have been a high school dropout for sure, because I couldn't keep up.
Right.
But like going into college on my own accord, love my parents. They've always been very good on helping me be very independent. So they were not going to like to pay for school or anything like that. And I knew that. So I was like, all right, I've got to throw out my own money now to keep this thing going. And the reason I took that semester off was I was dreading it. And so like I got into it, and same thing, I worked really hard and I felt like I was doing good. But same thing, I got just a bad, like my initial grades, like when I looked at them, I'm like, man, this is terrible. Like there was one class where like, you're going to fail this class. And I was like, I'm working so hard. And the funny thing is like the stuff I was learning, it was like, I did this when I had that virtual tour editing company. So I'm like, I did this. Like, why can't I write it out when I actually did it? You know, like, and that was kind of the revelation for me, was like, wait a second, like maybe I can do this, even though I can't necessarily on paper. Like I can do it in the real world, but I can't seem to do it in like a classroom setting for some reason. And that was my big realization. And that's kind of what like really made that shift for me, of like, maybe this just isn't the path for me.
Yeah. How did your parents respond? And maybe like friends as well, when you're like, I'm not going back to college.
Yeah. My dad said that. My dad was like, I always hoped you would go. He's like, but I respect the fact that you're not going. He's like, I respect it. So like, there was never any like, I didn't have any guilt or shame from that regard.
Right.
I was dating a girl at that point whose family was all like, they were super into college. Like that's all that mattered, was getting through college. And the funny thing is like later in our relationship, found out that like all of them were terribly in debt from going to these huge universities, and they're like in their 40s and 50s trying to pay it off, you know? I'm like, wait a minute. But anyway, that's a side note. But I got a lot of pressure from that side. And like ultimately, thankfully, that relationship didn't work out. But like that's where I felt the pressure from. They're like, wow, you're just throwing your life away. Like you're not going to accomplish anything if you don't go to school. You know, and like, and they force that. Everybody in the family too. It was like, I go to a family gathering and somehow the distant aunt that you only see once a year is like, hey, I heard you stopped going to college. Like, that's a big mistake. You know, like the whole family was like, that.
No kidding.
And so that was where all the pressure came from for me, was that. But like, and I didn't even know what to say. I was like, I guess I'm sorry. You know, like I have a decent, at this point I had started that, career in aerospace that I had for a while. And so I had a good job. Like it wasn't the best at that point, but like I was making decent money. I had no debt at that point in my life. So I'm like,
you're like, yeah, really?
I'm not doing terrible, you know, like I don't have any student loans.
Right. Yeah. So you end up working in aerospace. What did you do there? Because you get mistaken as an aerospace engineer, but it turns out you're not.
All the time. You know, it's either engineer or the other three main things are people like, oh, have you been to space? Are you an astronaut? I'm not a fighter pilot, and I'm not a skydiver. Like I work behind a computer, and I'll get into that. But like none of the fun stuff. So anyone who's like, oh, this is going to get interesting, I have not stepped foot on the moon.
Darn.
Coach John, you're like, and this episode's over.
That's it. We're done. Yeah.
With astronaut Alex Sanfilippo. Anyway, when I got started, let's go back to when I graduated. When I graduated high school, like the reason I got out of that virtual tour thing is because the economy had a major collapse, right? Like it was that 2006, 7, 8. Like that business just like literally.
And like real estate was disintegrating at that point. Like that was a big driver of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was gone. And that's the industry we were in, like was just that. And like, it went from like, hey, we got 30 jobs today to here's one we have this week. Right. So like it went from a lot to nothing. But while I was doing that, I did fall in love with real estate. And as soon as I could, I invested, which happened to be right before I started school. I had the opportunity to buy a property, got a tenant in it. It was doing really well. Like, I was thinking I was going to be making a lot of money and going to school and paying for it with their rent, right? Like that stuff. And then when everything wrecked is when I decided, hey, one, school isn't for me, but also like I'm going to have to go into debt to pay for it, because now I have a company that didn't work and I've got a property that I owe a lot of money on, and apparently it's worth nothing, right? And so like that put me in a really weird spot at that age. And so I got into aerospace. My dad was my connection there. My dad was always an entrepreneur. He was in the aerospace industry, had a name in the industry. So like I thought I could like kick down any door and be like, my name's Alex Sanfilippo and I want to work here.
Right. Yeah.
All it got me was a job interview. Let's put it that way. But I got an interview and I started as a part-time receiving clerk, which is code for I break down boxes and take out people's trash, is what that meant. But you know what? Like the thing is that industry wasn't hit nearly as hard because it was like all civil and like even some government stuff in that company. So I was like, I'm safe here. Like nothing in my life has been safe at all. Like this is a safe space. And the thing is, I just applied going back to even when I was like a kid, like business stuff just made sense. So like an example, like there was always like, they're like, hey, break down these boxes. And there's like 8 different places in the company where you have to break down boxes and then take out people's trash. And I just started saying, you know what? Like, hey, everybody who has stuff to break down boxes, like we're going to just centralize it here. And hey, everyone, like you need your trash emptied 3 times a day. Like here's a bigger trash can. Like little things like that like literally instantly got me noticed. People are like, dang, this guy actually is like thinking even with a job like this. And over the years, I worked my way up. I became an executive at the company. Like you fast forward again, this is over a 15-year period. So I wasn't like taking out the trash next day. I'm like running the company, right? It wasn't one of those. It's not movie quality. It's over 15 years. So I had various jobs and just really fell in love with the industry, fell in love with that type of business. And over a 15-year period, just kind of grew along the way. And eventually, like I said, became an executive of the company.
Is Jacksonville like a hub for aerospace? Like, because I know Florida has like you do. There is some like rocket launches from Florida.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
So
it's big. Jacksonville's a hub. Actually, it's funny. Right across the street from us is one of the biggest GE aerospace plants. Is right. GE Aviation is what they call it. And it's right across the street from like where that building was I used to work in. So yeah, there was that. All kinds of big. I mean, there's like huge helicopter manufacturers. We have multiple Air Force bases here, and Navy bases. So yeah, all that stuff. It's kind of like a lot. It's a lot for sure.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I guess I don't know a whole lot about Florida, clearly. I was like,
it's hot. We had alligators and hurricanes and some airplanes, and that's all you got.
Right. Yeah. You have this peninsula that's like lined up to get smashed repeatedly by hurricanes, it seems.
Correct. Yep, we do.
And it comes like every year, but Florida still seems to exist. Like the people who live in Florida must be pretty tough.
Relentless. We're just not scared of storms, or maybe we're just stubborn. I haven't figured it out yet, but that's another conversation. So
yeah. Now along the way, you bumped into a girl named Alicia.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She's great.
Yeah. I hear she's all right. How did you bump into her?
So going back to like just like my faith, I really dove into that like after some of these experiences. Like I was in that relationship.
And sorry, I interrupt you, but was your family religious, or was this something you decided yourself to pursue?
They were. I don't. And the thing is, I think anytime you're kind of brought up in something, maybe you don't take it as seriously, right? Because it's just the norm of your life. I didn't really take faith seriously until I was out on my own. Yeah. And that's when it became real for me. Like when I realized, okay, there's probably more to life than like just these few things, right? Yeah, and I had some rough events, like I said, like deciding to get out of school, getting out of that bad relationship, having to kind of humble myself and start from the beginning and taking out people's trash when I thought I was doing really well with my own company and stuff, right? Like all those things kind of like opened my eyes to the fact I'm like, okay, there's got to be something to grab onto here, right? And that's when I really just stepped in my faith. And for lack of a better term, like I don't even call it religion. I just call it faith. Like I just believe in Jesus and do my best to mimic what I see him do. Right. And so that's kind of been my life. Anyway, I end up stepping into I was going to a church. Someone invited me and I walked in, and at that point I was driving a Mazda RX-8. I don't know if you remember what that was, but when I got the Mazda RX-8, it was sweet. You know, it was like a cool car. I was
it yellow?
Excuse me?
Was it yellow?
No, it was the gunmetal gray is what they called it.
Okay.
The funny thing is I always wanted a color that was called winning blue, and this is relevant to the story. So I'm not just going on not going on a side quest here, you know, like, but I always wanted the winning blue color, but I just couldn't find it, not the price range I wanted it for. So I was driving around this gray one. So hey, I'm rolling up in my sweet car to this church I'm supposed to go to. I show up a few minutes early. In the parking lot, I see a nice winning blue RX-8. I'm like, sweet. The whole front of this church is glass. I'm gonna park right next to this car. And the dude who owns it's going to talk to me as soon as I walk in. We're going to be friends. He's going to let me drive and borrow his car, right? Like, we're just going to switch or whatever. So I walk in, and turns out it was actually a girl who drives it, and that girl happened to be Alicia. And she is the first person who walked up to me. And like, at that point, again, growing with all brothers, like, yes, I had dated somebody, but I still wasn't the best around like girls. That still kind of scared me a little bit, right? Like I can admit that even in my early 20s, but like, and she was like gorgeous. For me, I still say to this day, it was like love at first sight. Like I saw her, I don't even know if I said anything. She just like walked up to him like, that's your car? You're so pretty, you know, like, and I'm single, by the way, you know, like, oh, I'm Alex. Sorry. It wasn't that bad, I don't think, although we didn't date for years after that, but a couple years, but but yeah, that was like how I met her. So I met her at church. We were driving the same car, and
she had the color that you wanted.
Yep, exactly. We did trade occasionally, by the way. So
no kidding.
Yep,
Yeah.
sure thing.
So you maintained some kind of like friendship or before it became like a relationship.
Yeah. There was a couple of years where we were just friends, and we were actually really close friends. And like I don't know if she was dating anybody else, but like I dated other people through that, just kind of casually, nothing serious or anything like that. But yeah, we maintained a friendship until, and I did ask her out. I should give that disclaimer. Almost as soon as I met her, I more or less was like, marry me, but like I didn't say
right.
I was like, well, you go on a date with me, and she straight up was like, she said two things. She said, "You're too young and you're not my type," and those are her exact words. And I was like, I'm like, two things I can't do anything about, like,
ooh.
You would have been like, I just don't like your haircut. I'm like, done. I'll go fix that, But like, you're too young, you're not my type. I'm like, can't do anything about that.
Now, is she older than you?
She is. Yeah, she's just a couple of years older than me. Yep.
Right. And you're like, shoot.
I get it. At the age of 20 and 23, that would have been a little, maybe a little strange. There's a big maturity difference, especially when you think male to female.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah, that's something. So you're like, well, darn, this car thing didn't quite work. So
right.
Yeah. You stayed friends.
Yeah.
And when did the shift happen where you go? Because like while you're friends, are you like pining away or like kind of wishing like, dang, it sucks that we're friends. I wish there could be more here. Or
no, I try not to be that way. If it was a closed door, like I just did my best not to be that way. So we legitimately were friends, and like no romantic interest. I shouldn't say interest. Her interest was there, but like nothing that was acted upon. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It was a couple of years later. She actually was the one who brought it up, and it's just like randomly brought up. And at that point, we were good friends. Like she knew my family. Actually, it's funny. The day she mentioned something to me, she actually picked up my little brother, who was 15, to come to the same place I was. Because I texted him like, "Hey, any chance you can go pick up my brother from my mom and dad's house?" And so she did on the way. But anyway, she brought it up, and I don't even remember the whole story and all that. But at that, we didn't even start a relationship. Then it was like 5 months later. I'm like, well, let's just take the time to because we have a really good friendship now. Let's just not try dating and then like ruin it, right?
Right.
And the reality is, if she would have said yes to dating me the first time I asked her, our relationship probably would have lasted 6 months and then been gone. Like I had so much growing up and changing to do. And then even like when she brought it up and we waited another 5 months, same thing. It probably wouldn't have been as like special as it was, right? Or still is to this day. So like all in all, like to me, like that was a total God thing. Like the timing was just great. Cause other than that, it would have been a short-lived relationship that probably would have just been okay and then been gone.
Yeah. So when you finally went on that first date, where did you go?
I took her to actually it's a real landmark. So I took her to TPC Sawgrass, which if anyone's a golf fan, it's where the Players Championship is played. And our date was actually like out where they keep the trophy, like literally right behind the actual clubhouse there. So yeah, and that's also where I asked her to marry me. We went back a year and a month later and asked her to marry me right there, which was cool. So, but yeah, anyone can go look it up and type in the Players Championship Clubhouse or TPC Clubhouse. That's where our first date and where we got engaged.
Yeah. And is she a fan of golf or?
No, nope. Neither am I really. I love going to the Players Championship every year. It's actually like my favorite event to go to, but I don't play or anything like that. But the grounds are beautiful. I mean, stunning. And it's a really it's a top quality restaurant in town for sure. So,
okay. So yeah, extremely like well kept, well manicured, well kept.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Looks pretty fancy. So
for sure. Yeah.
Pardon me. And was it her or was it you that like lined up the first date then?
No, that was me. Yeah,
that was you. Yeah.
Yep. Sure thing. It was a bit of a surprise. I don't think I even told her where we were going or anything like that. I've always been like that. And the funny thing is, like when I asked her to marry me, we not once talked about marriage or anything. Like there was no conversation. I kind of from day one was just kind of like, hey, well, let's just not talk about this. Like let's just date and kind of see where it goes and stuff like that. So it was never brought up. I didn't ask her what kind of ring she wants. I just picked one that I thought made me feel like it made me think of her. Like maybe like I'm like, oh, I feel like this is something she would really love. And so a lot of people say that's absolutely crazy, but like it worked great for me. So
yeah. So you knew though, like after a couple of dates, like in your head, you're like, yeah, this is who I'm going to marry. Had you decided that or?
I mean, like I said, I feel like I knew that from the first time I met her, which I know sounds like super cheesy and stuff like that, but like I kind of felt that way. And the nice thing is like a lot of people like talk about how their first year of marriage is their most difficult. And I felt like we knew right away. But we waited that year. I think we got engaged at a year and a month, and then a year in 4 months, or sorry, it was 3 months later that we got married. So it was like a short engagement. We just kind of decided to do it that way because it was like at that point we're good. But we like worked through anything that we would have had to work through. So like that first year of marriage was like super strong. When so many people are like, hey, you're gonna have so much, like you grew up with only brothers, like this is gonna be a lot, but like the thing is, like and we didn't live together before we got married or anything like that, but we just like we worked all that stuff out, like, and we were very intentional with that, like with our relationship. And the first year and beyond, now we just celebrated our 10th year anniversary, and it's been amazing, like all the way through. I'm so thankful for that. I'm not just saying that because we're like on camera, like I mean it, like every year has been amazing. And I feel like even now at year 10, we're like literally in our best year yet, which I'm thankful for. So
absolutely. I'm coming up on year 16 actually at the end of this month.
Man. Congrats.
And and it's funny because I actually knew when I met my wife for the first time that I was going to marry her.
Oh man, you get me then. I love that.
But she I'm not sure if she knew it or not. Because there was a 2.5 year gap where she's from Australia. And so we didn't see each other for 2.5 years. And this is back in 03, 04 kind of thing, where again, the internet was like really still very much in its infancy. We used Skype when it first came out, and it had like an 8-second delay, like because we couldn't afford phone cards, like stuff like that. Right. So, but I just knew it. I remember, she got dumped into my lap basically for a couple of days to show her around the city I lived in at the time, from some friends that she'd met. So I had no idea who she was. They were just like, hey, do you want to show this girl around? I'm like, yeah, of course I do. I was single at the time. And then, lo and behold, here we are, 18 years later from the day that I met her, but I knew from the start. So,
man, I love that. That obviously that story resonates with me, but I love hearing that, man. That's so cool.
So at some point in time, you maybe started to get itchy feet with the aerospace industry, or like now, how does podcasting kind of factor into this?
Yeah, that's a good question because it doesn't make sense, does it? So again, I wanted to emphasize the fact that Alicia's impact on my life has been great. Like I really, like I didn't become an executive overnight, like I said, but like when she came in my life is when I really learned to step it up as a man, as a professional, and she's like top notch in every way, from like professionalism, like understanding how to like work well, run companies. Like she is brilliant. She has a really interesting background. I wish we'd get on podcasts because she's done a lot and she's very accomplished and super smart. But anyway,
my 101st episode guest.
Good luck. I can't get her to do it. So actually, it's funny. You had, and by the way, real quick shout out, you had the blind blogger on your podcast.
Maxwell Ivy.
Love Maxwell Ivy. And he's tried to get her on his podcast a few times and she won't do it. But by the way, everyone go back and listen to that because you talked about how to turn adversity into inspiration, right? Like, and I think it's in my story of like dyslexia. Like if you want to hear like times 100, right? And you want to like really get inspired, like go back and listen to that. Do yourselves a favor. Like I literally think you called it the blind blogger is the name of the episode, right? Like Maxwell Ivy. Anyway, check that out. Hopefully you can drop a link for people and stuff like that. But that's an important one I'd recommend listening to. But anyway, I digress. Back on point. So maybe you won't get Alicia. But anyway, she helped me a lot. And along the way, I became an executive eventually. And I was like excited because it's like, man, I worked from like the lowest level you could be, like a part-time guy, to helping run this company. And it was a big organization. And actually, I'm not sure what year it was that I was there, but the company actually got sold and went public. And I was part of like the team that helped with that acquisition. So it's actually funny. It's in Jacksonville, Florida is one of the headquarters, but it's a Canadian owned company. Technically. How about that? And it was part of a multi-billion-dollar organization. So it went from like big to like massive to huge. Right. And so like being an executive of a company that's like, hey, this is $1 billion company to be like, that's huge, right? That's really great. And I was by far, it's funny, I'd sit at that table and I was by far the youngest there by like 30 years, because I was in my mid to late 20s. And there are people in here that are like 60s, and it makes sense. Like they needed the experience. They're industry people. But anyway, long story short, I remember one day I walked into my CEO's office. Like I was at my desk and I realized that something happened. We actually saved in I had 5 divisions I oversaw, and one of my divisions saved 10% across the board, which again is massive. Like that's never done before. So in my head, what I did is I walked down he was the CEO. So I reported directly to the CEO. In my head, I kicked his door down to get into it. I obviously respectfully was like, can I come in? Right. But like in my head, like I was so proud. Like, so I'm like, door down. And in my head, again, I put my feet on his desk when I sat down. I did not do that. I respect him. But in my head, that's what I was doing. Right. Yeah. And I was like, hey, did you see what we did in this division? I explained it to him. And he goes, yeah, I saw it, man. And like, I could hear in his voice, he wasn't happy about it. And I was like, hey, you realize we saved 10%. Like we didn't lose 10%, right? Like just making sure you understand. And he's like, no, I know, man. And he goes, the problem is you didn't tell the shareholders that we were going to do that. And they could have been selling the stocks at a higher level if they would have known that you were going to exceed the goals by that much. And man, I didn't get like discipline or anything like that. He's just like, man, we got to talk about this stuff if you're going to do something big like that. He's like, we just got to kind of stay with the status quo. And I remember walking out of his office, realizing on the walk back to my office, which wasn't terribly far. It was 40 yards or 50 yards away. But the whole way there, I just kind of had my head down. I was like, you know what? I think my time here is up. Because I didn't want to be, and not that any executive is not a cog in the system, but I felt like all I had to do was maintain the status quo now. And that had never been me. Again, if I would have maintained the status quo, I would still be that part-time receiving guy because I would have never given someone a bigger trash can, right?
Right.
That initiative. And so like that was always what drove me. I think looking back now, I didn't know this then, but I think I was always that entrepreneur. I was just able to flex it within an organization. Right. And as soon as I got locked out of that, and it's like, hey, that creativity is gone. You just have to do this and tell us if you're going to do something different. That did not settle well with me. And I will say this, I need to give this side note disclaimer here. I worked very hard for the next 3 years. So this was probably year 12. Yeah. I worked very hard. My last year there was actually on paper my best year there because I believe the way you end one season is the way you begin the next. I wanted to leave on a good foot because I wanted to start on a good foot. Yeah. And I can say this with confidence because a year later, after I had left the company, they brought me back to speak at one of the senior people's going away parties. So like I left on good terms. I want to make sure everyone knows I didn't just start slacking off and like smoking in my office, stuff like that. Like I wasn't doing any of that. But yeah, that's where the writing on the wall came from, Coach John. Like it was the fact that I just realized like I couldn't be me there anymore. Does that make sense?
Absolutely it does. I love that. It's so clear. And I'm like, I think of like an episode title though, from like how like a bigger trash can made me an aerospace executive or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually not bad. I like that. Like how podcast. I need to obviously share what you asked. Like where does podcasting come from, right? What happened was, and this is kind of maybe just the way my mind works. We've already determined it's a little bit different, right? Yeah. I realized I've been in an organization at this point for 12 years. And I probably didn't really know how to be an entrepreneur anymore. And I tried a few little things that just didn't work. It was like failure. I should say failed attempt, right? Like I was not a failure by any means. And I just had this realization. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't. Like if I have a foundation of hundreds of thousands of dollars and staff to play with, I think I'm pretty good. But like on my own, maybe I don't know what to do anymore. So in my lightning fast mind, I discovered podcasting again through recommendations from some of my staff. And I was like, you know what? I could do a show. And what I decided to do is I decided to talk to people who had successfully left a 9-to-5 corporate job to pursue becoming an entrepreneur full time. And I just asked them how they did it. And that was my idea. Like maybe it was a little bit selfish, but it was free coaching, right? Like
100%. Yeah,
John, I'm all for paying for coaching, but also at that point I was like, I'll take it for free. And the thing is, the show did exceptionally well. And I'm very thankful for that. But also, so like two things happened. The show did good, but also I learned the right way to become an entrepreneur. Like it literally taught me that. And when I went to apply it, the funny thing is like I had fallen in love with podcasting. So I went to apply how to be an entrepreneur. I was like, well, I wanted to be in podcasting because I love podcasting. Like this industry has an abundance mindset. It's so much fun. Like I love everybody I meet in it. Like Coach John, you and I met through podcasting. Like I could not imagine not having this relationship, right? So like for me, I was like, I want to be all in on it. So that really, it was the start of how that transition happened.
Yeah. And I love that, and I leverage podcasting in somewhat of a similar way. I'm like, if there's somebody that I want to have a conversation with and just like, I love human stories. That's my thing. Yeah. Like even when it comes to coaching, it's like, it's really about the people's stories. And my analogy is that I help co-write a couple of chapters, in their life story. And hopefully that impact will change the ending of their story in a positive way. That. Yeah. And so this gives me access to people where I'm like, hey, do you want to come on the show? And I get to kind of pick and choose who I get to have these conversations with. And I absolutely love it. I can see why, podcasting is so amazing. And then, when you first replied like personally to an email that I'd sent, I forget what email I'd sent, but I was like, there was actually a personal reply. Like I could see that it wasn't just a canned reply. I was like, whoa, like this is like the CEO or the co-CEO, like the founder of this company. And he just replied to me. And then, I now I want to go back and look at whatever the email was. And maybe it was about that thing that I was doing, the project that I was doing, because my brain probably works in a somewhat similar way. I wanted to figure out, I found podcasting by accident. I was scrolling through Facebook. I was a little bit tired of what I call a social media burnout, just producing content to grow awareness of my business that I exist. And there was this ad for podcastguest.com. And it was like, be a guest on podcasts and talk to new audiences. And it's like, whoa, it seems way more efficient to go and like talk to audiences that don't know I exist yet than to only talk to my already existing audience. That's how I'll go, and so I signed up for podcast guests. But then I thought about it, was like, man, I'm like applying to be on a lot of shows and not getting a lot of return. And I wanted to figure out what my return on investment is. Like, okay, I'm spending money to be on this platform, and I'm spending all this time to try to get booked onto shows, and it's not happening all that well. So I was like, I wonder if there's other platforms out there. I bet there is. And the Google search, and then I discovered a few other platforms, including actually, PodMatch came from Jason. What's his name? Do you know the psychic? He's like a psychic lawyer.
Yes.
Jason.
Jason. Goodness, it's gonna bother me now. But I know exactly. I can literally see his face. He's in Tampa, Florida. Jason, I've had multiple conversations with him.
Oh yeah,
super nice,
fascinating guy.
Cannot think of his last name. And Jason, if you were watching, listening to this ever, I'm so sorry. It's like on the tip of my tongue. But yes, I know who you're talking about.
I know. So I found him on another service, and he was like, "Dude, you got to check out PodMatch." He's like, "If this service is like the MySpace, and then PodMatch is like Facebook, in terms
so funny."
And so I was like, "Okay, fine. I'm gonna go check out this PodMatch thing." And so you were actually the last, or PodMatch was like the last entrant into my trialing out these different platforms. And then I started building out this spreadsheet of like, which platform was I booking the most shows on? How many requests was I sending? What was my pitch success rate? And what was the cost per episode and all of this. And PodMatch came in like with one of the highest pitch success rates and one of the lowest cost per episodes. And I was like, whoa, this is awesome. And I was spending less time doing it. And so you'd taken what was like a really great concept and turned it into something super efficient, which is like my brain absolutely loves. And then, so anyways, I guess I must have shared that with you somehow, and you replied, and then you asked if you could get on a call with me. I was like, what? This dude wants to get on a call with me. And it turns out you're actually a really nice guy. And I was like,
who would have known?
Yeah, I thought, it seems funny. I'm like, why should I be so surprised that like the founder of a company is a nice guy like a successful company is a nice person who wants to get on a call and like talk to people. But I think that's part of the reason why you are successful is because obviously you've set up systems and efficiencies and have a great team supporting you. And that allows you to have the freedom to be able to do things like this, which is really amazing.
Yeah, that balance is always tough. Now, granted, let's go back to my aerospace background. Like I was, at the end of the day, I had 5 divisions I was in charge of. Basically, my job was to protect profit margins and to streamline processes. So like, I do understand that to a certain extent. And I applied that as soon as I could. But for me, like, again, like learning there's different kinds of entrepreneurs. I knew I wanted to be a community-driven type of entrepreneur because that's where I was always thriving. Again, going back to my faith, like I started doing the best I'd ever done in my life when I got into a true community that believed in Jesus and wanted to love and support other people. And I wanted to mimic that in the way I became an entrepreneur. So for me, like still to this day, anyone watching or listening to this ever, if you reach out to us and you're like, hey, I wanted to have a conversation with Alex, I heard his conversation with Coach John, and I'm going to find that someone's going to send it to me. I'm going to reply. And it may not be like a book of like, oh, thank you so much, but I'll say something back to you. And that's just the way that I like to lead. And like you said, like you do have to have good systems in place for that to work. Because at the end of the day, like I'm not like every day in the nitty gritty of things because I don't have to be, because we've built systems around that, teams around that, so that I can stay facing with people, because at the end of the day, that's where I know I can really help and impact. And Coach John, like honestly, I hope any founder would respond to you, because the email you sent, I remember which one we're talking about now, was so involved that I showed my co-founder, he's a software developer. I'm like, bro, you've got to see this email. I called him, and he's like, wow. He's like, that's amazing. I'm like, I'm going to call him, like I'm going to find it. I'm going to call him. So I don't always like take that much initiative, but the fact is that you put so much into it. Like I don't believe any founder of any company, any size, would not respect the way that you reached out. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough. Yeah. And so here we are having this great conversation today. And, I know when I've been like looking for any other connections, I've often tapped you on the shoulder and been like, hey, do you know anyone who does this? Cause you're really well connected. And so, and then the idea for PodMatch, and I know we're a little bit short on time, which is a bit of a shame, because I think the journey into building a software company now, and the ups and downs of that, because again, maybe it seems kind of glamorous, but what happens when there's a bug in the software, and you get people who are angry or frustrated or whatnot, or people who are just mad about like paying for a service.
I've heard all of that, first off. Yeah. I mean, so like going back to like being the entrepreneur, like I knew that like I wanted to start this type of business. And for me, I remember like, again, like I was interviewing people who had successfully left a 9-to-5 job, but I'll be real, Coach John, I knew 3 entrepreneurs. So, because I was a corporate guy, like if I was like, I want to talk to executives, like I could have lined up for days, like, and I probably still could, but like, I was like, I know 3, I brought all 3 of those entrepreneurs on. I asked all 3 of them to come back. I asked all three to come back again. They all said, dude, you need more friends. And I wrote that a problem. And thankfully, like I said, like my show did really well, and I won't even give myself credit of being the best. The timing was just perfect when I launched. Like I don't even remember the exact day or time or anything like that, but for whatever reason, I launched it right when everyone in the world just decided they were interested in that for whatever reason. So it just worked out great. The stars aligned. I'm super thankful for that. So my show did well. So I started being able to get who I needed. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, I'm like, man, if I didn't launch it this perfect time, like, would I still be trying to interview my 3 friends that are entrepreneurs, or like would that network extend? And so PodMatch seemed like the very first thing I did to support the industry was that, because I'm like, man, this is a real problem. And I validated that problem. We don't need to get into all the ins and outs of me talking to people and stuff, but decided to launch it. And again, like launching it with a community focus, like that's really important. And like you said, man, I've from day one, we've had problems with the software. Like all software always has problems, right? Like day one, the first complaint I ever got was our logo was really ugly. And it's because I made it on, I learned what Canva was. And I literally typed it in and put like a little line next to it. And like day one complaint is your logo is ugly. And I was like, well, does the software work? Yeah, it's working great. I'm like, okay, good. Let's focus on that first. And then like, I was like, how can we I don't know how to make a logo. Like I'm terrible at this, right? Like, so found Fiverr at that point. And I was like, oh, someone who can help me. Right. And we've had other iterations since then, of course, but like, complaints start from day one. And it like, I'll be real. My skin is so thick now compared to what it used to be. I'm still always going to respond the most respectful way possible, because we literally have a member obsession is what we call it. We kind of stole it from Amazon. They say customer obsession. I don't like to use the word customer because I think it dehumanizes a little bit. So I say member obsession, because you're a member of anything we use. You're part of our community, part of our family. So I'm going to make sure we give you that respect. So I still respond respectfully, but I'll be real. Initially, man, my heart was broken every time someone would say something rude. Hey, your website sucks. Sometimes we would literally get that back. And the thing is, at first I was like, man, that's so like, does it suck? Like we've put so much work into this. Is it not good? And I'd always respond, even with something mean like that, and respond in a nice way. Hey, so sorry. We're working on it. We're trying to make it better for everybody. Doing it on a budget right now. And without fail, almost every single time someone would respond and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know someone would actually check this. Like over and over again, all the time. I had people like asking on calls to apologize because they said like really rude things. Like, I've never had a software company respond to anything, so I just assumed it wouldn't. In my mind, I'm like, why'd you say something mean to say something mean? You know, like it's like cussing out a tree in the woods, and then the tree responds, like, oh, I'm sorry, right? Like, but yeah, like, so from day one, man, I've had to really develop that. And that was for the first year, especially. That was extremely tough for me because I was putting my all in it. And it like just hurt to think maybe I'm charging somebody, it's not actually helping them like that. I cannot like sleep at night if I think that's happening, right? If I'm charging somebody and not delivering more value than they're paying for. That some people have no problem with that. That is not me at all. That was for a little bit when I felt like that might be happening, when people would complain, which now I realize it's just people like to complain and we're adding a lot of value. But at that point, I didn't realize that yet. And that was very tough for me for a while.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely love PodMatch. And by the way, in the description, you'll find a link to check out PodMatch. Click that link because it also is my affiliate link.
Yes.
It doesn't change the price that anybody pays for PodMatch, but I mean, I love. Now, here's another amazing thing that you have done with PodMatch is you made this crazy decision to allocate 50% of the revenue coming in from membership fees to go back to podcast hosts so that we get a couple of bucks in our pocket for. And you did this to allow people, I think, to be able to stay in podcasting, because that's one of the biggest problems is to monetize a podcast is really difficult. You know, it's not impossible, but like it's difficult and it takes time, and podcasting is kind of a slow burn. And so you thought, hey, let's do this crazy idea where we take half of the revenue for our membership fees and give it back to those who are on the platform and active and busy.
Yeah. This was an interesting decision. And like to clarify real quick, it goes back to podcast creators. So like if you're a guest, we're not splitting revenue or anything like that, but like the better a host does with releasing your episode and the assets that come with it, like the social media posts and stuff, the better off you are anyway. So if we're giving them a little bit of money, they're using it to do that, it's a win-win, right?
Absolutely.
But the creators themselves, like almost immediately, Coach John, when I was starting this, I realized that we had a churn rate problem, and I didn't know that term, but now I do. Like churn rate just means people basically come in your front door and just as fast they leave out the back door.
Yeah.
And it was only podcast hosts. And I told my co-founder, Jesse, he's the developer. I'm like, we have a serious problem, dude. I'm like, almost 90% of people leave or that are on the host side.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, why? I'm like, I don't know. It seems like it works. So I started reaching out. I reached out to 1,000 people.
Wow.
And it wasn't
Yeah.
overnight. Like it was one at a
Yeah.
time. Just they'd leave. And we automated that. We'd basically say, hey, we saw you left. Why? You know, like, so it wasn't even me doing that, but I was evaluating each response. We were keeping them on spreadsheets. And there was the 1% of the time where someone's like, you are the worst. That's why I left. Right. Like,
right. Yeah.
Of course we did hear that. But again, that was the 1%. The 99% all said the same thing. Oh, I didn't leave PodMatch. I stopped my show. Like I completely just stopped.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started diving in. So like, basically, you know, 900 plus people like are saying, oh, I'm leaving the industry. And so I just started asking like, why? And like, I narrowed it down. And the number two contributing fact, number one is they thought they were going to get famous and rich overnight. Like that is right. People leave. And I hate to,
shoot, it's not going to happen.
Coach John, I'm so sorry. Actually, the 100 episodes, you know better.
Yeah.
Episode 3, I'd be like, hey, by the way, you're not going to be a millionaire tomorrow. But the second, like past that, and most of our people were, that wasn't the problem, but it's the fact that they were draining money and maybe they had families or something like that. I'm like, hey, I'm losing $60 a month. And I just like, my family just can't deal with that right now. It was things like that, right? Because it's the production that goes into it, the work that goes into it. Yeah. And I was like, man, maybe we can solve this problem. Like no one's going to get rich using PodMatch. And I know that, that's okay. But I'm like, what if we can offset that $60, $90, $100 a month for some people? Like, would that keep them podcasting? And I'll tell you what, we've seen that happen. People can stay in it and even afford better tools, which again is better for the guest as well. And so, we made that decision to cut our revenue in half. And I don't always share that number because I don't want to I don't want to get the wrong idea that it's all about the money. But I was like, you know what, we can sustain ourselves and grow our business with half of what we have here. The other half, let's give it back to these creators so they can stay in the game and keep on going. It ends up being a win-win for us as well. Like, not that we have any selfish motive in there. We really want to serve and help the industry. And that was a decision we made that was like an interesting one. I was hoping other companies in podcasting would follow. Nobody was really interested in being part of that. As a matter of fact, some other companies, and they will all remain nameless, were very unhappy with us making that decision because they said it's anyway, they just didn't agree with that notion of helping people on that level. So
which I think is fascinating, but it shows that because and here's a whole nother conversation. There's nothing wrong with a business being profitable. In fact, it must be profitable to stay afloat.
For sure.
And people have this tenuous relationship with money where like earning money and whatnot, like, and that's a whole other episode as well. But your ability to remain profitable while giving back and serving just like speaks to what you're really about with this company. And then you did this one other crazy thing before we wrap up, and that was you purged like half your membership at one point. This crazy, and you probably got a ton of exposure from it because they're like, what is this crazy guy doing?
Yeah, we actually heard those exact words. Like, same thing, you're absolutely crazy. And again, so we are bootstrapped, so which just for anyone not in software just means we use our own money in it. So, and I can tell you from day one, me and Jesse, my co-founder, we signed legal documentation. Like, that's a good thing to do, right? And then we each put $2,500 into account. So $5,000 total. And thankfully, we never had to put any money in the business past that. But we launched with that. There's no debt. We've never raised any capital. I'm not against that. Again, we just have a lifestyle business versus something like an enterprise business, right? That's more our design. Like, we want it to have a great culture, and we don't want anything behind us saying, hey, stop focusing on people so much and start raising profits, right? Like, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not the model we wanted. And so like by doing that, like we've been able to run it with a bit less, right? And so, but one of the things I noticed is I was like, man, these people leave the industry, but not all of them shut down their account. So it stays there. So Coach John, you might reach out saying, oh, they said they're looking for a nutritionist or someone who like understands that world, right? They understand weight loss and stuff. So you reach out to them, but you never hear back because they stopped their podcast 6 months ago. And it's very popular, especially in the ones that have raised capital, to never let that number of total users, which we don't use that word, we use members, right? But total users, to never let that number drop, because if it drops, then shareholders are going to get angry, right? But for us, we don't have that behind us. So I said, you know what? Who's not active on here? How long have they not been active? Is their show in existence? And we did this from a data-driven way. And we kind of took about 3 months to do all this. And we literally overnight cut half the people. And we got 0 complaints from that because they were all truly gone on both sides. But at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what? What serves our members better? Having a bunch of like a big number to like impress everybody, or 2, when they reach out to somebody, they hear back, which is better for our members. And at the end of the day, going back to our number one core value, which is member obsession, what's better for our members is to have less people on the platform, but that are going to respond, that are going to be high quality, that aren't going to be trying to spam, right? And so that was very important to us. And still this day, every month we have an automated thing that tells us, hey, the system says we recommend removing these 50 people. these 25 aren't active. This person is actively spamming people because they're getting like 10 complaints a day coming through them, right? Like our system will automatically remove those. So like our number may never really climb, or not as rapidly as some companies would like to see. The quality stays though. And at the end of the day, like my job is to protect the people that are trusting me with their wallets and their time. And if they can't trust me with that, like what service am I really providing? And so we've devoted ourselves to that. And yes, and people called me crazy. And I still to this day hear that was a stupid move because now my company looks smaller than it was. But I mean, I'm not here to make it look like I have a big company. I don't need that ego boost, right? Like, we all struggle with pride enough. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just serve people really well. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, man, Alex, obviously we could chat for quite some time. I know you got to get going here as well. It's truly been a pleasure, from selling golf balls as a 10-year-old to becoming, turning, expanding a garbage can into an executive position to now serving the world of podcasts in a way that other people think is crazy, but has done like so much for us in this industry. From all of this, if people listen to this episode, the thing I always like to ask to close out our show is like, what is one nugget from your story that you would like people to take away from hearing this today?
Yeah, first off, I believe that all of us have greatness and creativity within ourselves. So think about yourself and listen to my story, but don't say, oh, I could never do what he has done. Because you're right, you can't. But I also can't do what you will go on to do either. Yeah. So remember that you have greatness and creativity within yourself. And I always like to remind everybody about that. But what you do with that greatness and creativity is what really matters. And I always say, do for one what you wish you could do for all. Seek to serve, not to be served. Find the one person that ultimately needs that greatness that you have and serve them. And yeah, we all love to change the world. And I have a dream to do that too. But at the end of the day, like I'm going to do for one person what I wish I could do for everybody today. And if I could leave you all with something, that's it. And that's the mindset I do my best to renew every single day. Because at the end of the day, I can probably only help one or two people a day. I'm going to focus on that one. And ultimately, hopefully that one person goes on to change someone else and snowballs into hopefully impacting the entire world one day. But remember, you've got that greatness and creativity. Discover it and serve one person with it.
I love that. Alex, thank you so much for your time today. It's been truly a pleasure, and I look forward to when we get to chat next.
For sure, Coach John. It was an honor to be episode 100. So thankful for you and what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.